Hello and welcome to Tao Radio.
Thanks for joining us. This is Mona and
Leah,
and we're here to take you on a journey with us while we explore the great sounds, music, arts, and cultures from all around the world. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we're so excited to kick off our first ever interview. And it's with one of the most vibrant, thoughtful, and charismatic people that both Leah and I have the privilege of knowing. An artist whose work explores rich themes of cultural belonging, migration, identity, and race. Born in London with Caribbean heritage, Geoffrey Chambers brings a diverse background across the arts. It includes mark making, performance, music, film, and installation. All of it deeply informed by Afrosurrealism and Afrofuturism, and as we'll find out during our conversation, by much of his own personal heritage and his own personal folklore. His unique approach continually challenges assumptions about identity and culture, often creating reparative and inspiring narratives. Geoffrey's achieved significant milestones in his career, from winning the inaugural Brixton Open in 2002 to making history in Brazil as the first British-born artist to have his own trio elétrico at Salvador's Carnival. He's also co-founder of the reggae collective Dread in Brazil and showcased his short film Prove It at the Cannes Film Festival. Back in the UK, Geoffrey Chambers has contributed as a consultant on the BBC documentary series Black is the New Black and completed his master's in race, media and social justice at Goldsmiths University. Today, his artistic journey continues with his community engagement as a trustee and resident artist at the People Dem Collective in Margate. Here he fosters creativity through engagement and joyful mark making, which was recently supported by the Arts Council England. So I welcome you all to join us and also reach out and give us feedback. We delve into folklore. We discuss how it influences and shapes Geoffrey's powerful work. Let's dive in and welcome Geoffrey Chambers. Hi, Jeff. I just wanted to tell you today is just kind of a, loosen up. You know, we haven't seen each other in ages. We're having a loose chat, but also kind of getting to design something together that also is what you want to talk about, you know, because for us, you know, Lee and I have been talking about folklore for ages, and it's such an alive theme, right? That you cannot put it into a box, and actually it will run away with you and guide you depending on what manifestation it shows itself in, whether that be from dance to food to history to, you know, and the person themselves and how their relationship with folklore is. Because if they do believe that they are part of the process of participating in folklore, then the intentionality of their actions also has a different resonance to it, right? Or the participation with their community has a different resonance to it. For us, the whole point of this podcast as well is to get to know all these different expressions of folklore. And for me personally, I love that you can't pigeonhole it into one box, and, you know, that we're leaving the realms of science very far away and we're now really entering the realms of human expression and being.
Actually, a lot of the people that we will talk to are artists, and therefore I think it's a question of what is your incarnation in time and space now? If artists a lot of the time speak of being a channel or being open, that it's something that's communicating through them. How do we locate you here and now, but also what are the other times and spaces that are running through you in terms of narrative lines? So yeah, we start with the template, which is kind of the questions that we sent over. Geoffrey.
To be fair, I've been on this real roller coaster. I've had an exhibition and all kinds of things, and I've only just looked at my WhatsApp today. I mean, it's great, so I get to respond very fresh and kind of in an unfiltered way, which often gives a kind of immediacy to the reactions, which is often, as you say, to come from a sort of less curated position, less curated channel.
Yeah.
So like, the first question you've got is the personal relationship with folklore, and that's what it means to me in the relationship, and how do I express my own individual folklore. Well, I suppose in a sense it kind of goes back to my earlier or even earliest notions of wanting to be an artist, or feeling that the artist was within me. And that becomes a very emotional space of having pencils and how precious a pencil was. I've got one in my hand at the moment, but this is a big, thick one, so it kind of reminds me of that thing where when you're little, your hands are small, pencils are big. Finding the available spaces where I could kind of privately and uncensored way make my marks. So I'm from quite a big family of children, so a piece of paper that was mine was very precious, and even when I couldn't find a piece of paper that was mine, a place to store my paper that was private was also a very luxurious place. So I'd find myself drawing in the backs of cupboards or under the dressing table. That would be where I'd be laying up underneath there and making my drawings of trains and the skies and of being a bird and flying away. So that relationship of telling my own personal stories, of creating this kind of magical world where at least I was me, and this flesh thing, even as a 6-year-old, was, someone said to them, watching the interview with William Popel, and he said something like, when someone called his name when he was a child, he'd say, well, who's that? Who are you talking to? I'm me. Who's this William Pope you're asking for? And I think we build these narratives, we build our own folklore, particularly as an artist, throughout our lives. And we take these things, these totems, maybe some icons, maybe it's a feeling that helps us build our way to curate and create our own world. And if we're aware enough, if we're lucky enough, we hold on to it. It becomes a part of you that can remain untouched, that the outside world can't really affect so much in a fundamental way. And when you do have your private moments, when you do have those spaces, that law that you carry with you, that you've built within you from being a child, are often the places where you're strongest and able to kind of confront the things that are happening in the world.
Were there any sort of characters, in that imaginary landscape that starts to emerge underneath tables and in the backs of cupboards? Is there any part of it that seemed to be developing with you, or like a character that came out that emerged with you?
In hindsight, there is. I'm kind of averse to say innocence, but I kind of think that there's a wholeness to it. And I think that sometimes it's easy to forget that. Integral part of yourself, in a way that they say, like, integral in terms of whole. I think in Latin speaking, integral is kind of like a wholeness. It's milk integral.
That's Portuguese.
Yeah, it's the essence of it. Say that, and at times I feel as an artist, it is very much something I want to get back to. If my work becomes too real, too figurative, too literal, then it's all, I'm moving away from my own inner story. And a lot of my work is influenced by the West African diaspora. So like of Ogun, Balegba, the opener of gates, the trickster, and of symbols. Very much two things really, two artists that really kind of helped me realize that place was the place to be, was Jimi Hendrix. Even in his short career as a writer, I think it's 4 or 5 years, was able to kind of create this fantasy, this believable world, where we were as bold as love, these magical places. And a writer called Ben Okri, particularly Ben Okri in his book, The Famished Road, and The Boy of Dreams, Azaro. And this boy had this duality and lots of choices to make, whether he was in this physical, mundane world or the world of dreams. And it was this balance, always this war of position, to which world was most real, and which world he belonged to, and which world mattered, and which world held power, and which world was really scary.
Yeah. It'd be beautiful to have some excerpts read from it if you want to.
I've got some pieces based on, I don't have them around. Some work's more figurative, some work is more, again, the magic.
There's like pure subjectivity.
So one of the things that, as you were speaking, I didn't want to talk earlier, just listening to you and your energy, and thank you for sharing, some of these very personal experiences, but it feels that there's a very deep satisfaction at play here as well. And do you think that as an artist who's really immersed in his own folklore, developing his own story, because we're so overwhelmed in the media and in these stories about the suffering artist and the tortured artist, and I wonder whether there's that and there's another reality as well, or maybe an underlying reality which actually it's not supporting that story, where actually if you are immersed in your folklore and you are immersed in telling your story, whether that be in, in that innocence of being,
Mm.
that actually you're achieving a huge sense of satisfaction, huge feelings of pleasure. And if you can just touch on that a little bit, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, again, we have this war of position. Being an
Mm.
artist is a very capitalist endeavor.
Mm.
We can't escape that. Yes, people make art for love, but the business of being an artist is a business, and we're often combating quite literally the marketplace and our own identity. And a lot of artists who are able to kind of negotiate those spaces, times find a place where they can balance that thing. And it's okay to be making in a marketplace that wants to commodify your entire identity, because basically people don't buy art, they want to buy a piece of the artist, So that thing of always being a commodity, some artists are very lucky, they don't have to engage in it and they can do it. But when one is entering the marketplace, it's one of agents, it's one of curators, it's one of galleries, it's one applying for grants, it's one of open calls and residencies.
A very congested space.
And often a very unsatisfying at times. However, going back to your question, which I kind of forgotten because I had to really remind me.
Yeah, we were just talking about how embodying your folklore as an artist, and that there's a deep satisfaction there, that there's deep pleasure there, as opposed to the stories or the myths that are created. There's all these myths about the suffering artist. And, and so in terms of doing the art, do you suffer when you do the art itself, if you are embodied and if you are participating in your own folklore creation? I think that's kind of where I was leading.
I mean, there's a deep satisfaction in it's nothing as free as being me kind of thing. There are times when you are in it and time doesn't matter. You don't know where it's gone. It's all about, if it's the two-dimensional plane doing a painting and stuff, where you're on top of your technique and that goes. I mean, that as a singer, if you're singing and you're thinking about technique, you're not connecting. So that thing of being free, being yourself and being satisfied in that can often be temporary, but when you're there, that's why you put the hard work in, that's what you suffer for. That's why you make the choice of, is it food or paints? And when paints win, you get to express yourself, then there is nothing like it.
And it's funny, the times when it happens, it might not be that you can't predict it, right? Because you can kind of try and engineer a lot of stuff to give you that space. But actually, when that connection with something bigger is ignited, it's often spontaneous, or you can only do so much. And then you're lucky when you're there. But I wonder as well about the folklore of the self and this, like you're talking about the industry. And Muna had a funny phrase the other day for me. She was like, oh, they tried to occupy you. So it's like the industry tries to occupy you in order to take what you represent so that it can be something packaged and sold. And that is a whole folklore in itself. How do you, what's your power when it comes to, or how do you hold your power? How do you cultivate your power when it comes to the myth of you, which is a necessary story to tell, and the preservation of the secrets that you carry so that you can do justice to the subjects that you want to express?
Tell the secrets is a fantastic phrase. I love that.
Maybe rather than like a meta question on it, like for you, what is that? What are the myths of Geoffrey Chambers? Which are the ones that are there for industry curation, and which the ones that maybe the industry can't tolerate, or the ones that they wouldn't understand?
I think it's a bit like I'm looking at them. They're looking at me. I'm looking at you. I'm really looking at you. And I've been to places that I don't know if I will ever be able to express them, because those are the things that have made me, those kind of adversities. I'm not that kind of cathartic artist that's going to, the great big that you can have. There's that piece of me that you can have, and I'll happily give it with every fiber of my being. I'll happily offer that to you, consumer, the market, the system, the structure, and I'll offer it as a cultural text in its most pure form. But there's only ever going to be some, those are the places that the turmoil, the raging fire of self forged me in the personal sense, for example. The things that forged me, again, going back to the folklore, as a man, as a human, as a lover, as a parent, as a son, as a brother, those things that make the richness of life. Not all of those are a thing that I will offer, but the stories that I create around them, those, yes. And I would weave this narrative of the mouths in our eyes, the sound of oh, that's my exhibition at the moment. The chorus that comes from our own harmony and our nostrils that turn into mouths and our ears that turn to mouths make the sound that join us together in the spiritual om. I'm happy to come along.
So what's this exhibition? Tell us.
I can grab one here, grab one off the wall. Here's a mask.
So masks.
They're masks.
Mouths.
Eyes up.
Like the scream.
Like what was gentler?
Mm.
Gentler. It's the O is up. It's the first
Unity.
unity. You can see the mouths joining there. It's another way. Another set of mouths. That was a mouth with a filtering that way.
Mouths, because that's again a point of expression.
Yeah.
Or because you can eat and you can, like, it goes both ways. It's a consumption, but also the expression is something that goes outwards.
It's that, again, as a singer, and having an ensemble where we do go, we breathe in and we exhale. And there's something that's always fascinated me about exhaling. So when you stop, you're dead. Again, it's this creating this thing that when it's a vessel and I'm creating the rim of the vessel, when we talk about as a ceramic form, we talk about the body. And I find that very interesting. The resonance of the body, the rib cage of ourselves and the body of a vessel. And we don't often strike them, but there's something about the rim and then the rim and the lips. And it's very much that. So in that, creating the story on a very simple thing and creating this myth of within these vessels, within these objects, to connect to a harmonious thing that we all share, that we all can then navigate a unity. It's very interesting to me as an artist, particularly, things that connect other people, not necessarily to me, but maybe to a different group. But having a symbol or a metaphor or a story, simplest level, that doesn't necessarily have a lot of the stories that we create are quite based on a friction, on combating male meets female. What are the frictions when up meets down,
Positions,
position when the real meets the unreal, but how about these things where we meet and the friction isn't necessarily the thing we can put aside?
Yeah, and folklore, in a way, I engage with it. Really, I mean, you're really getting to an essence of an idea for me as well about that, the myths and stories that contain all of us, which we all emerge from and then have our own expressions of, in a way. And if we play in that space, this moving container, this flexible liquid changing container, how much fun is that?
I've been listening to the history of China a lot. Part of their folklore is the seven-tailed fox, which is a very female deity. And the seven-tailed fox is the ultimate teacher. She's not often the most fair teacher, but as a foil or as a tool to get to talk about how the female mosquito bites is a fantastic way of weaving in culture and story and place and of safety and of cultural knowledge. And, it's in a contemporary sense, we adhere to artists, but also we have more access to folkloric stories than we ever have had. And some of our people, we would say that someone like Chomsky, in terms of his power to speak on great political issues in this very simple way, and how people connect to that, is very much a kind of throwback to our griots, soothsayers almost, wizards, our witches, our warlocks, people who hold these cultural memories and are able to tell us truths in really complicated times, in really fractious times. Often forget the stories of peace are often our most powerful stories.
I was just going to say, actually, before you said the word forget, is these stories remind us to be human again. And that ability to contain or touch or embrace this memory inside of us is not only satisfying and soothing and brings us confidence, and it's a form of love because it removes us from being these isolated, disconnected, solitary beats. Yeah, that actually where then it becomes easy to talk about war and discord and
I think it's permission for there to be meaning, and the artist is allowed to use symbols. Like we were talking about the mythology of a place and the mosquito and the fox. They're allowed to mean things, and you don't need an explanation for it. It doesn't need to be justified. And in art, you can do the same thing. And then you've got these meanings that are made up of the media about how everything's oppositional and there's just danger everywhere. Whereas in story and in folklore and in art, you have the ability to transcend danger or the meaning of danger, the peril that you must face, the peril that, the stories that Geoffrey, you say that your private stories and how they form you, and then the things that you can take from there to color your universe and to design your universe with. And that is the harmonized, from chaos comes order.
Yeah. I like how you said permission, because it is permission to lean into the allegory and the meaning rather than the literal description of something that allows discord.
And then that gives growth and that gives transformation. Whereas in the reality that we find ourselves, or in the capitalist space or the media space, you're not given that sovereignty, you're not given that dignity.
It's funny you speak on this. So there's a very profound danger if we aren't careful about our myths and our folklore. Because, my whole lifetime has been the Nakba and the terror in the Middle East, particularly in Palestine, and the myth of this biblical gifting of the land to a chosen people. And that's a very dangerous myth. And even at the heart of this mythical enslavement in Egypt, where there's the Egyptians are one of the societies, pre-digital societies, that documented everything. If 1 million people left Egypt, they would have documented it. And they didn't leave Egypt to go anywhere other than Egypt. They left an Egyptian territory, allegedly, to go to another Egyptian territory. And on that way, they met people who they massacred. Who are these people? Where did they come from? And why isn't the land theirs? And if these people are still there, these narratives, these myths, these stories are that powerful that they endure for 1,000 years. No evidence, no supporting witnesses. All of this stuff is absolutely...
But I mean, for me, that is really reading these myths in a literal sense, rather than in an allegorical sense of the meaning of overcoming and becoming stronger and more spiritual humans, right? And so again, it's that in itself is a kind of destructive folkloric tradition to approach our stories in this way to justify destructive human behavior, or where you actually approach them as actually stories about overcoming and meaning and growing and spiritual expansion. And so that in itself, it's, we were living a kind of capitalist or subjugation of approaches as well.
Or people don't realize that some things are documentary and some things are fantasy, and that they both have a place, that they're both meant to be part of our literature, but that you can't mix them up,
I think that the holding of who holds these stories then becomes very important. Who holds and appropriates or approbates power from these stories. If we're looking at folklore as a top-down thing, then that can be as oppressive as anything. But there's nothing more powerful than a story.
A story, exactly.
Yeah. And then there's the story, we have the folklore, the myth of the flood, and we have the myths of the fire. Now, at the moment in Los Angeles, where we have this story coming up of the protection of a singular fish.
I haven't seen that. What's the story?
There's a fish that lives in a reservoir up north that the Environmental Protection Agency has decided to prioritize the water. So that less water is going to fight the fires.
You're kidding?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very Hollywood.
Say again?
Very Hollywood. I thought the fish was a metaphor for some of the residents of the scorched lands.
But this story goes on. It holds its power more than the power of the pistachio farmers in the water because they bribed politicians. And this is a fact that you can trace. Farms do have more than enough water. We just live in this time where the myths, and also with, I suppose, in the digital age, in a hyper-normalization of some of these stories that we're being told. You know, the folklore or the tales and the myths of the immigrant coming to take barbarian horde, different from the Roman attitude to the Visigoth. These stories, these fearful stories, these fearful myths come back again and again.
And do you think that happens when we are very much submerged in the material?
Very much so.
Yeah. And I think right now we are very much in that space as a reality. Everything. I mean, I think, this science has succeeded in a sense in reformulating even our feelings about ourselves to the material only. But there's a movement to separate that. There's a movement to move away from that. There's a movement to acknowledge our multi-dynamic being. We are material, we are embodied, but we are all these other things. And how does that fear and the material, how can we overcome that through what you do, through your community programs, through giving people permission to participate in their own personal folklore than in their community folklore?
Yeah, I think giving the permission to create our stories is probably the most powerful thing that I'm dealing with at the moment in terms of a political and social struggle, in terms of my collective's battle with state. I mean,
can you give everyone a little background to this, Jeff? Because I mean, Lee and I are familiar about the community centre and the history of it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about it?
So there was a New Deal plan coming from central government to communities across the country. And as part of that deal, we were contacted to create what we had our own plan of a cultural centre that was rooted in Black and Brown experiences, but it was for the whole community at large. And the district council of Thanet loved our idea to build a cultural centre. And it would have been one of the first diverse cultural centres in the country, the only coastal one. So the government loved the plan. Then we were granted £22 million.
Yeah.
This was in 2020. And we were promised £1.4 million to build our cultural centre. Now, one of the things was that district council didn't really have diversity in its makeup. It's the kind of one of the centres of the racist right wing of the country. Now, our district council was a UKIP council, which is a very right wing, anti-Black, anti-Brown, anti-immigration. Anyway, we've got the gift. We were granted 22 million, and in the shuffling, we were meant to have a temporary holding space and buy a building, create our cultural centre, and basically they just reneged on the promises.
All of them.
All of them. Even though the main reason they got the 22 million was that we would be able to have our cultural centre. And there was a lot of years' work.
What happened to the 22 million themselves?
The 22 million. So there are sort of like these long-standing cultural centres like Dreamland, which is a fairground, or the Winter Gardens, which is a venue. And the stakeholders of those kind of let those run to the ground. So 6 million was devoted to refurbish the Winter Gardens. Winter Gardens is a place that they should really knock down because these have been untended for a very long time. Asbestos is a thing. Just taking the asbestos out would cost millions, to refurb.
But they're unactive at the moment. So there's not people actually in those spaces.
But these are commercial activities, right? Dreamland is a commercial enterprise, or?
Yeah, but they see it as part of the cultural landscape. And why not? So 22 million is significant.
Well, it's redundant and just laying there.
It's been bought by Live Nation, so they still have the fairground. Hold a lot of gigs. But there's just space. I mean, there's some people who are very angry about it. I kind of, percentage-wise and building-wise, it could have been very much done. And the cultural centre could well be active now. However, we are now homeless after being given a sort of a temporary placeholder, a meanwhile space, as they call it. And we were to be evicted last week. We've been given another 3 months, but we still have to find a new space. And it's a very much a whoops thing. We really meant to, whoops, that money went, oops.
So what actions is being taken to kind of get Thanet to really, recommit to their original promise?
They created the Creative Land Trust,
Mm.
which has the ability to buy, purchase, and reform places. But really, a lot of it's, I try not to say it's intentional, but often you get with these cultural things a lot of promises, and you get surrounded by a lot of incompetence as well. And I think the incompetence sometimes trumps the bad.
Idealism.
So what's the route forward? I mean, what's the new vision?
An old vision, because we kind of lost time. I mean, were we left to our own devices, we would have our spaces by now. It's really going back to, we started a new crowdfunder, and there are people in the Thanet District Council who are sincere. It's just that a lot of the people who are sincere are really quite incompetent, and that's also a story that sometimes we forget, that people aren't often wicked or evil or bad intentioned. They're just not very good at what they do. And as artists, we don't have that luxury. As artists, we are compelled to over deliver. The story continues within the collective itself. My view is that there are a lot of people who are hostile to the agency of Black people within the spaces, but they are welcome to take the money. So in a sense, my view is a rising tide lifts all boats. So at least that money came to the community and can help people. We have Roma community. We have a new kind of Black and brown community forming from people who have come to the area to care. A lot of carers have come to this community, and you see them. I've been here for 8 years now, and there's a Black and brown visibility that's striking and beautiful. Those people who have physical and mental health issues are becoming more and more public because of these Black and brown refugee. It can only be a good thing.
In a sense, it looks like from your description that this vessel that you were talking about in the beginning with the mouthpieces, it's starting to actually almost like that's a totem that's emerging in the collective.
Very much so. Very much so. And the collective is very much
It's beautiful. I love that, how you tied that in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much based on the sort of positive acts of your ancestors and celebrating those, and always being connected to those. In a way, Afrofuturism is a kind of the dreams of my great-grandparents, their dreams of me.
Yeah. So, and that starts to come a little bit alive, even on the streets of Margate.
What I find touching about what you just said is that actually through the carers, through care, we are lifted, and that's such a beautiful kind of expression of the change that's happening, even though the same community is not being recognized enough and not being supported enough. They still forge the change through care. And I understand that's what your community center has been doing, providing opportunities for expression at affordable prices, inviting the whole community in to enjoy the center with you and to participate with you and to grow their skills and tool themselves. And so I think care is also part of what that center has been doing.
It's very much a part of it, and it's very much a part of connecting people. We have an allotment now, so growing our teas, growing our, it's a small plot, but again, it's getting our hands in it and dreaming these things, making them real, making our ginger tea thing. So,
Folklore, that's knowledge. This is the lore of the land that you reconnect with. Yeah,
and it's keeping the spirit active, alive. Spirit and love are adjective, They're not passive things. I just receive love. No, love, you do. You actively love.
They're verbs.
The verbs are a verb, a describing word or a doing word.
Yeah. And it's an energy. It's an energy that, of course, then it's active because it's being exchanged, it's being emitted, being received.
But that's also one of the things that I was thinking when you said one of the funny things of breath. You said on the exhale, when you stop, you die. And I was like, wait, that's the inhale. But then my mind was going as well, but actually the exhale causes the inhale. So the more you exhale, the more you give, the more you get. It's a very literal thing. The more force you put into it, the more force comes back to you. And then another connecting a dot was that in the dynamic of the duality of me versus you and us versus them and those stories, that you need that narrative. There's a protagonist to every story. You need that. But on a universal scale, it has a different effect. So even in the challenge that the community faces and the adversity and the incompetence and the reasons why things don't work and that you don't get what you need, there is a resilience that is building into the people that are in that care system together. And actually, in a funny way, maybe they get even more from not getting it. They have to create more resources within themselves because of what's not given to them. And that power grows and grows more biologically and organically through that challenge than it would if they were handed, I want this, and it comes through. Of course, the system should deliver much more. This is not an excuse for the system, but it's a recognition of how much we have within ourselves, what sources we are anyways. And when those sources are connected as a community, like how much can come through that.
And how necessary they are, and acknowledging their necessity, acknowledging their power, acknowledging their existence.
We hope that these things are contagious.
Then we make a podcast about it.
Yeah. Again, spirit, love, those are hopefully at the heart of what I do as an artist, and as a way of that's the one for you. I'm looking at it all the day. This is the Battle of Lewisham. The Battle of Lewisham. You can see that there's a guy being held by the police, but surrounded by the spirit, but surrounded by the feminine and
protected self.
Yeah, of courage, and
Amazing.
that mixing of the real, the unreal, the building of a message, the building of the narrative.
But I love that because we need so much courage and inner voice at the moment to take any form of action that we find really to be necessary. Because I think if we do what we're told, it will be really not such a positive outcome. But so small actions, maybe that kind of a painting reminds us, take small actions of courage because you are protected if you stay true and if you stay with spirit.
Absolutely. Resistance is so important. Resistance and tenacity. And again, this thing of being together within these stories. I think that some of the stories that we are drowned in of the superhero, of this person who's always can come and save the day. They can fly in with a superpower and save the day, whether it was a Western or a science fiction thing, as opposed to people who get together in their joy.
Yeah, definitely.
So it robs agency. It robs our own power from us.
Yeah,
for sure.
Been waiting for such change to come from outside.
I'm going to throw back, Geoffrey, in our last minute to where you and I started. What would your superpower be if you were a superhero?
We've discussed this one a lot.
It's our origin story.
Superpowers. Going back or now, my superpower would be to sleep a lot. I kind of think of superpowers being more mundane than that, more mundane. And some of the superpowers that I kind of think of, I have. I mean, I can hear the group outside. That's one of my superpowers. Connect disparate people. My group's from 11 now to 2.
Is it?
Across all the cultures, from transgender to refugees to young to old to the neurodiverse. Yeah. If it was like a fictional thing, I would have the power to make people forget.
But I love that your ability to bring people back together. And I feel just through this conversation, because your own sense of yourself is so strong and that you are participating fully in being yourself in your community, that is unconditional love that you are generating. There's so much power to that, to giving. Because in that you are giving yourself, right? Freely in a way. And so it's a very powerful position, but it's very inviting. And it provides permission for everyone to also be themselves.
Yeah, everyone else is taken. Everyone else is taken.
So, folks, I think we had a great session.
Yeah, it's been lovely. Absolutely. Certainly. Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Oh, I love you both so much.
Okay, bye.
Have a great one.
We hope you've enjoyed this conversation just as much as we have. And maybe you started thinking about what folklore means to you. Or maybe you are already participating in more than one folklore. We would love you to keep listening as we explore these conversations and ideas together. Please follow us on this channel you're listening on or any of our social media handles. And also, if you're interested in participating with us in this radio show, or if you have any ideas or feedback or comments, please do not hesitate to send them to us on towradio@towfestival.com.